Okay, so thank you everybody for coming and joining us on the first of a brand new year of masterclasses. So today we are talking in a usual fashion. It's a kind of two-phase approach when we do these masterclasses. The first part of the video is going to be more around the life and times of an infosec person, what to expect, that kind of thing, maybe a bit of sort of career development or career advisories. The second part of the video is going to be based more around some kind of concept or whatever is important to learn as an information security professional. Today, we're going to be talking about defense in depth in that second piece, or the beginnings of defense in depth. That is quite a long subject matter and can get quite involved. So it's probably going to be done over a number of different videos, not necessarily all at the same time. So the life of an information security professional. I've been doing this now for 25 years. Times have changed quite a bit over that time. When I first got into information security, it was relatively young in the grand scheme of things. Information security had been around for a little while, but there were very few security practitioners in it, and it really didn't look anything like it does now. Back then, we were predominantly part of the IT department, usually. That's where a lot of people saw security as being part of. Nowadays, things have dramatically changed. There's all kinds of people from all kinds of walks of different life who are getting into this kind of game. Many still get in from IT, but there's a hell of a lot now coming in from the legal side of things, maybe from financial side of things. It's quite interesting how things have changed over time on where people are coming from. And to be honest, for me, it's great because it does enrich this particular sector. We do need lots of different people with lots of different opinions and views. If you're coming from a financial background, quite often you're used to a lot of compliance, you're used to a lot of regulation. And that's actually quite important in this game because we do have a lot of compliance and we do have a lot of regulation. So financial people, when they come in, they usually have had extensive training or extensive access to that kind of regulation, so they do understand it. Legal is relatively new, but there's a whole blend of cyber lawyers that are kind of starting to spring up all around the place, and they're proving to be quite high-priced members of the information security community and indeed the legal security, legal side of the community. But all in all, what I really kind of want to talk about first off for today is kind of your life as an information security professional, what to expect. Information security, there's a couple of things that you're going to experience, no matter really what sector you're in, be it you're a pen tester, be it you're a consultant, be it you're somebody internal, maybe a security analyst, as they call it, somebody working in a SOC, all kinds of things, from all kinds of walks of life. Information security is kind of a hard discipline and profession to master in many respects. One of the things that you're going to have to get used to is being very, very adaptable and very, very quick to react to situations that a lot of other people in a lot of other disciplines aren't likely to really come across that often. The closest thing you could feasibly come to maybe is somebody in the forces or somebody in the police or maybe somebody in the IT department where a situation will seemingly come out of nowhere, jump on you, and you'll be fully involved in that particular issue. A lot of other people in a lot of other disciplines see issues slowly coming at them. In this kind of discipline, it tends to go from being really quiet, really sedate, and you're filling out some documentation to all of a sudden the whole world is crashing down and everybody is falling, everything's falling around you. So that's one of the things you're going to have to kind of get used to. One of the things that you are going to experience a lot of, and you are going to have to get used to quite extensively, is documentation. Everybody hates it, but it is a particularly important part of what we do. Quite often when you're communicating advisories to people or risks, because you will all be doing that kind of thing in your day-to-day work, you need to make absolutely certain that you've backed up what you've said with good, solid, sound documentation, and that you store that documentation, especially when you're talking about things like risks, where risks are being assigned to a group or to an individual within an organization. Yeah, you know, you want to make sure you keep your documentation up to date and current, because if you're challenged, then you'll have that documentation there with you to back up what you've been saying or to support you. Or God forbid, if somebody starts pointing fingers during an incident, or preferably after an incident, you'll have that documentation to prove kind of why somebody accepted a risk. And it's not going to become your issue, it's going to be their issue. Documentation is rather key. Plus, you know, throughout your life cycle as an infosec professional, you're going to use a lot of the documentation you create on incidents that have occurred, or risks that you've reviewed, or decision-making that you've made, or projects that you've done, whatever it may well be, to provide you with a very rich level of information for your day-to-day work going forward. You know, intelligence, and I don't mean what's happening up here, although that is useful, but intelligence as in a data set to draw from, both from your own data set and maybe those who you work with, is really going to be quite important going forward, and it may shape some of your decision making in some of the things that you're dealing with. The other thing you're going to have to kind of come to terms with, and this may be being a little bit maybe a little bit you know, not so nice thing to experience, and maybe a bit unfair to some people, but you're going to come across a lot of people thinking they're information security professionals who aren't information security professionals. The problem with security that you will find is that everybody has an opinion, and that's fine. You know, having, you know, a wealth of advisories from different sources in this game is really, really good and really, really useful. But you have to remember, they are not information security professionals. Quite often, they're looking at things in a perspective conducive to what they do for a living or what they've experienced in the past. Information security professionals tend to have a very, very different way of viewing things, a different way of reacting to things, and quite often, some of the best information security professionals, especially during an incident, have kind of their ability to turn their opinions and their emotions off. You know, one of the things that you have to remember, and it's something I kind of said in my primer, you're quite often going to be going off facts. You know, you're not going to be going off supposition. You're going to be going off facts to the situation that you're finding yourself in. And in order to look at it objectively, quite often you have to turn off any emotional involvement you have. Very, very much in a lot of ways to how maybe a doctor is if they're performing some kind of surgery. It sounds silly, but they can't afford to get emotional about the situation. They have to go in, they have to do their role to the best of their abilities. Sometimes it goes well, and unfortunately, as we all hopefully have not experienced that often, it doesn't always go to plan. In security, it's kind of a similar thing. Hopefully, you'll be able to resolve very quickly any situations you might find yourself in. But also equally, when things go wrong, sometimes frustration, anger, whatever can start to rear its ugly head, and then you need to probably be able to kind of switch that off a little bit. You're not there to have an opinion on a situation. You're there to deal with a situation and fix it if possible there and then. It's not always possible to do that. A lot of people will think they know loads about infosec, and they might be very, very good at it. But remember, you're the one that's been employed as an information security professional. So think within your role, and just forgive maybe some of those people who think they know better than you and know your role better. You know, maybe they've got some good info to partake, but they're not the ones who are there as information security professionals. You have to make your own decisions based off of, you know, what you have around you, and how the situation is unveiling itself. Another thing you're going to have to get used to as an information security professional, and I don't think I'm going to get any bad feedback on this one, is quite often we have rather serious unrealistic budgets, timescales, and sometimes expenses that go with it. Everybody wants security. They don't want to pay for it. Sometimes trying to get the budget out of a department to undertake sort of adequate security on a project they're doing, or trying to get budget from the powers that be to kind of deal with a situation that you could perceive is feasibly going to happen, is like getting blood from a stone. Things are getting a lot better, but quite often you're expected to kind of deal with the security of an organization with the equivalent of £5 a packet of crisps and a pickled egg. You know, as I said, times are changing a little bit, but we also have to kind of mention that information security solutions tend to be on the expensive side, and sometimes you're asked to do more with little. So kind of get used to it. Sometimes you really have to fight your corner. The other thing that you're going to experience, maybe, especially if you're in more of the risk side of things, where you're assessing a lot of risks, you're kind of doing maybe some what they call blue sky thinking on what could happen to an organization. You may receive certain levels of ridicule or frustration or pushback from your peers, and sometimes from management above you, and sometimes even from people below you, especially if you're trying to impose an information security countermeasure such as multi-factor authentication in an organization where they've only had one-factor authentication, like usernames and passwords. Sometimes making changes doesn't go down particularly well for people. This is why in my primer, in that first masterclass I did, one of the things, or a couple of the items that I mentioned first, which are really, really important, are things like understanding psychology, understanding communications as well. Quite often you're going to be a part of making changes potentially to an environment that has an impact on, or a perceived impact, not necessarily it's a real impact, on things like the productivity of the people working within that organization. So you have to do a lot of hearts and minds and get them to understand why you're doing what you're doing. It's almost like you have to spend quite a significant amount of your time justifying your own position or justifying your own reasons. So, you know, one of the books that I recommended is Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. I do recommend all of you go out and purchase that from Amazon and read that, because it's a really good book on how to negotiate and how to communicate, because you are going to be doing a lot of that in this game. You know, the project manager who has been running this project for the last 8 months, that all of a sudden realizes or is told that they need to get sign off from information security before their project can go live. And then when you kind of go in as the infosec professional, you find there's glaring holes that they need to fix before you're willing to sign it off, only to find out the project manager hasn't accounted for that in their budget. You know, sometimes you have to work with them to negotiate maybe more budget, or you have to kind of communicate to and negotiate with the project managers themselves, them finding where that budget really comes from. Yeah, it can get a little bit tough. This is why documentation is one of those key things that you kind of need to get used to, because every time you make an advisory or a decision, you should always back it up with documentation. It can save your life in the darkest of moments, and yeah, you know, you kind of get used to it. Sometimes people are going to provide significant pushback. Things like, you'll hear quite often, what's the risk? Why am I concerned by this? You know, they may even ridicule you outright. I've had that. I've been accused of being a glorified security guard in my career more times than I care to count. It doesn't happen so often nowadays, but in the early days, it did quite a bit. Just get a thick skin, just smile at them and say, yeah, whatever. Okay. You know, at the end of the day, you are there to protect an organization, both from internal and external malicious actors, or sometimes even from itself. That doesn't mean you have to be, an ass about it when you're communicating or when you're documenting things. You just have to bear that in mind. Sometimes you're going to be delivering potentially really bad news to people who aren't really not going to want to listen to it. You can fall afoul of a lot of disagreements. Some people will say, no, what you're talking about is complete rubbish. That's their opinion. They're allowed to have their opinion, but you're the information security professional. You know this space the best you can. And you're in that role. They are not, unless they're another information security professional. But more often than not, when you're talking to other peers in this particular space, you can actually have a civilized conversation and go down, have a pint or a glass of wine with them in a bar somewhere and talk it through. After all, they're going to be experiencing the same thing that you're experiencing in their own organizations or in their own section of the organization. Always be ready to defend your position. And don't forget, sometimes you can be wrong. Don't be too proud to back down. Always be calm about everything as well. And quite often the way that I deal with some of the situations where I've got people kind of asking for things, they don't, can you secure this environment? Can you look at this environment and tell me what I need to do from a security standpoint? What I do is I kind of break it down into a very simple methodology. And this is where I kind of record things sometimes. I look at, what is the request? What are they asking for? What's the intent behind the request? What's the business objective? Is it to secure some critical asset within the business? Is it because somebody has watched something on telly that told them they needed to have this kind of product to do their job well? Really look objectively at what they're asking for, and trying to assign it back to a business objective. One of the things that is quite key to record down when you're doing your daily thing and you're looking at requests like this is, what's the real world security implications to consider when you're doing something? If you're dealing with a company who are moving over to multi-factor authentication, good example, from single factor, say username and password based authentication, and you're going to put a token in or an app on the phone that you have to click once you put your username and password in, that will have a real world implication, not only for security for that organization, but for the people who are going to be utilizing that on a day-to-day basis. Some people don't get on well with technology, or it takes them a long time to get used to technology. By considering things like that, you can put quite a significant amount of effort into working with people, say on the help desk, to provide them with guidance on what happens when people have problems or they're not getting on well with, say, that multi-factor authentication change. Make friends in those departments and try and preempt what those issues are going to be. It knocks down sometimes that level of questioning or ridicule that you may experience in your day-to-day work. Figure out what challenges you're likely to face because of a decision. If you're suddenly gonna, your bosses say, I want to block Facebook. Now, yes, there's a multitude of ways you can do that, but there's going to be some significant pushback from the user base if you make that kind of sweeping change. Everything that you do will have some form of a challenge, but by understanding what they are beforehand, in similar ways, what you're doing here really is kind of risk assessing what you're putting in place. It's important to do that, so where you're going to have the problems, so you can feasibly deal with them before they become big issues. And it does move quickly into big issue country if you don't take countermeasures in the early days. What resources do you have to complete the request? We've already mentioned it. Security tends to be rather critically underfunded. Sometimes you have to make decisions on what you can do and when you can do it. Sometimes you're not going to be able to do everything that you want to do, so you have to look objectively and figure out what you can do with the budgets that you have or the time that you have. It's not just about money. Sometimes it's about time. Sometimes it's about resource. There's a couple of others here. what people will you need to include to make the changes that you want? I've already mentioned things like help desk, you know, the IT department, legal, financial. Get other people in other departments involved in some of the work that you do on your day-to-day, especially get to know the people in legal quite a bit. You may have to count on them at times to back you up, especially if somebody's really refusing to do something and you have a real compliance requirement to do it, because, you know, maybe you're a company that requires PCI DSS compliance. You know, if you've got a user who's refusing to do something, or a group of individuals who are refusing to do something, there's potentially going to be compliance issues that come out of it. And that's where you bring in people like legal, sometimes financial, or, you know, people from the C-suite to kind of force that through. And then finally, what risks, you know, are you introducing? For every risk that you're resolving, sometimes you're creating 2 additional risks on top. Multi-factor authentication, good example. We keep using that. It's an easy one. We've used it a few times. People are used to remembering usernames and passwords. If you introduce another factor, there's going to potentially be a failure rate. If it's an app on the phone they have to tap to be able to log in, what happens if their phone breaks? What happens if they lose their phone? What happens if their phone is stolen? You know, sometimes by resolving a risk or undertaking work in your day-to-day life may introduce additional risks. So just look objectively at those when you're looking at people's requests or when you're thinking about doing something. Being an information security is kind of tough, and you do really have to get used to people really, really pushing back. That has gotten better. One of my lovely staff has brought me a cup of coffee. That is a fact of life. You will have to get used to it. I don't see things changing. We're never going to be the rock stars of the company. You know, if any of you like Fight Club and you like that, you know, you're never going to be this, you're never going to be that. You know, that's very much what we face. But look at it this way: if you do have a security event that kicks off, and the countermeasures that you've put in place, and the plans and the playbooks you've put in place, save that organization from a rather significant loss, for a short time, you are going to be the rock star of the company. And that's a perfect example of a time when you start asking for a little bit more budget, because of course everybody likes you at that point. You know, utilize that. So that's a little bit of a primer on being an infosec. Now let's cross over into the realms of defense in depth. Now, for those of you who've been in infosec for a little while, maybe you're training, maybe you're just crossing into it, you probably at some point would have heard the word or the term defense in depth. What is that? In essence, defense in depth is the way that you're probably going to be securing an organization, whereby you layer security countermeasures over other security countermeasures to create something we call the security onion. Sometimes you hear it or see it represented as an iceberg. But whichever method people build to represent their security, it is called defense in depth. So let me see if I can share my screen. I actually have an iceberg I use quite a bit. Bear with me a second. I'm happy to make this available to anybody who wishes to have a look at it after this. All you've got to do is get in contact with us. I'll make it a little bit bigger just for those who might be looking on a screen that's quite small. One of the cool things about being in information security is you very quickly figure out it is not all about the technology. There is a lot of process, there is a lot of procedure, there's a lot of various different levels of security that go into a defense in-depth model. So once you've gone into an organization, you've looked at the culture, You've looked at what they do. You've looked at their assets. You've assessed, where they exist, how many staff there are, data sets, and you've done all the initial sort of pieces of work that we've discussed in previous masterclasses. You're very likely quite early on to build your defense in depth model. I personally like an iceberg over an onion, but you can represent it as an onion. So the way I like to put it is there's kind of 6 layers to my usual defense in depth model. Layer 1 is the very visible layer. That's the top of the iceberg. That's the bit that you see poking out above the water. Okay. It's very visual. People can see it. Sometimes when you're, say, walking around your neighborhood, you may see a sign on someone's gate saying, beware of the dog, or smile, you're on CCTV. Maybe you know these people very well and you know they don't actually have a dog and their CCTV is nothing but a dumb camera with nothing attached to it somewhere down the end of the corridor. The reason why they have that sign is it's to deter the average individual from coming in and trying to rob something out of their garden. And there is a method to that madness. By having a good layer of visible security in an organization, you can portray a level of security that you may or may not have to people externally, which works very well in business when you're trying to, when your peers are trying to sell the solution, or against malicious actors who maybe they've got some beef with you or your organization and they want to try and actively attack it. Now, what do we mean by visible security? So visible security, as you'll see on the chart, if it's not too small for you, things like executive charters and statements, security policies, and active roles and responsibilities, the kind of things that aren't sensitive for anybody to know. It could be as simple as making some of your policies available on the website. Whenever you're dealing with new service providers, provide them with some of your security policies to tell them what you will accept and what you won't accept. It's all the stuff that basically pretty much anybody can see at any point. Compliance is an easy one as well. Not actively going through compliance, that's something else entirely. But by having an ISO 27001 certification, or by having a PCI DSS attestation of compliance, or one of many other certifications that you could actively use in your marketing, those are all clear levels of visible security. And I've just realized there's a spelling mistake on layer 1. That's really embarrassing. I'll change that for when anybody who wants this. The second layer is your perimeter security. Now we're delving more into kind of at the waterline of the iceberg. So it's a bit of what you can see, a little bit of what you can't see. This is where your security starts to become a little bit quieter. So what do we mean by kind of perimeter security? Digital honeypots, wireless security, perimeter security countermeasures such as firewalls, third parties that are actively involved in helping you manage security and supporting you through your security. Communications, maybe you release updates, maybe you're a software company developing your own solutions and you're putting out security communications to your customers about new security issues that may or may not be sort of cropping up. It could be pretty much anything. Maybe it's internal communications that you're sending to internal staff members, as well as maybe some key third parties who operate on your site for whatever reason may be. VPNs, DDoS protection, secure file transfers, all of these defenses are there. They're not noisy, but with a bit of digging, you can find and see that they're operating. And it shows a level of maturity with security beyond the very, very basic. It sounds silly, but some of these things are very useful to track and to actively say that you do, depending upon the type of business your organization is in. Layer 3 is below what I term as below the waterline. This is the stuff that you don't normally see in an organization. This is, network security. It's the multi-factor authentication, privileged access management, your security standards that you portray to meet within the organization, your endpoint security, vulnerability scanning that you undertake on your devices, that kind of stuff. Now, a lot of this sounds like I'm saying things in a really random manner. But when we get closer towards the end of my security layering system for defense in depth, you'll see that each one of these different countermeasures you're putting in is complementary to another countermeasure further down in the stack, thus providing what we call defense in depth. Layer 4, asset-based security. Quite often, organizations do asset-based security where they're securing an asset as opposed to a system or a service or a person, whatever it may well be. File integrity monitoring, data discovery, user awareness training, secure data destruction, data loss prevention. All of this stuff is there to protect usually some form of data asset from being compromised in some form or another. Things like endpoint security are a blanket security countermeasure that you use to try to catch almost like flies in a web. Sometimes you're successful, sometimes you're not. It adds a layer of security to your organization, but it's almost like that spider's web. It's a catch-all. It doesn't catch everything. When you're talking about file integrity monitoring or encryption, you're making that layer of defense a lot more targeted towards protecting a certain type of asset or system or solution. It's also where things tend to get a little bit more expensive on the security side. Once we've done with layer 4, you've got layer 5, which is where we get to the more procedural side of things. These are your defense in depth countermeasures, where what you're doing is you're looking at supporting your entire security stack through procedures, change control, be it instant response, be it third-party management, risk management, security procedures, log management, your security operations centers, wargaming, password management. All of these things are actually probably some of the cheaper of the side of things to do because it relies on you writing them and testing them, supporting them, and all the rest of it. But they are very, very critical to that defense in depth. Okay. Finally, layer 6, what I term as intelligence or SHTF. Now, if those of you who've never heard of the term SHTF, that means shit's hit the fan. That's the kind of what's gonna save you in the long term when everything else fails horribly. This is where you have your legal representation. This is where you have your BCP. This is where you have your HR reviews for criminal record checks. This is where you have liability insurance, although there's a big debate over whether or not liability insurance and cyber liability insurance, as its term, is actually beneficial, especially if they're refusing to pay out because of erroneous terms within the contract. This is where your security intelligence sits, whistleblowing processes. You'll be surprised how many organizations don't have some form of whistleblowing process. You hear a lot of companies turn around and say, we trust our employees. I get having trust is good. Having control is better. And if somebody has spotted an employee doing something they shouldn't do, there should be some kind of process in place for them to be able to alert the security people or maybe somebody else in charge that something is potentially happening within the business that can be stopped or prevented before it occurs. It's actually probably one of the more important aspects of security that I usually recommend. This is where your phishing tests and social engineering tests are as well, making sure you know who's susceptible to phishing, know who's vulnerable to social engineering. Your pen tests, preferably you have them annually or after a significant change. This layer 6 is part of that, defense in depth, where you're either actively testing your security countermeasures to make sure that they're working and that there's no holes, or if there are holes, you understand where those exist. Or it's backing up against some or all of your defense in depth layers failing. One good tip, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in incident response when we start talking about that. You cannot prevent incidents from occurring. At some point, you are going to experience one. The reason we have defense in depth is because these defenses are layered in a way, at some point, hopefully, active attack, or what we sometimes call a passive attack, will get picked up by one of those layers and will alert you or your team or somebody within the organization that something is amiss. Okay. If someone's actively trying to hack you, for instance, hopefully your perimeter security in layer 2 is going to alert you to this. It's going to warn you. If that fails, then hopefully your multi-factor authentication, that you have in place will prevent them from accessing things once they've managed to get into the internal infrastructure. Failing that, encryption, maybe your encryption, maybe they've cracked through your access control entirely and they've got access to your data sets. Well, if you've got key data sets that are encrypted, where you have some kind of product that uses, say, blockchain technology like we do to protect key data assets, they can have access to the systems all they want. They're not going to gain access to that critical data, to ransomware off and to make you all feel like fools. That all these layers are in place to prevent internal and external attacks from occurring in a way that means you're not going to either be alerted or be able to thwart them. Now, word of warning, this is just an example. There are plenty of ways to create your defense in depth, and there are countermeasures you can put in that potentially aren't on that chart, and that's fine. Every organization is different in the way that you secure it. Every defense in depth model that you build for an organization is equally as different. Organizations have different assets that they find, critical to their operation. They have different ways of doing business. They have different third parties that they interact with. Every business is different. So I'll just stop sharing that now. So every organization you go to, once you've kind of established yourself in that organization and got your feet under the table, build yourself a defense in depth model, maybe of what they have at the moment if you're inheriting security from somebody else. If you're building it from scratch, which is a wonderful situation to be in, but very rare these days, then build your model, put in your countermeasures. Quite often with that particular model, what I'll do is I'll go into an organization that I'm consulting to and I'll say, right, let's go over what security you currently have. And I try to map out their security in that defense in depth model that I've just shown you. It shows me where they're strong. It shows me where they're weak. And it shows me where there's potential to increase layers of security based off of what I've already assessed by way of, what key assets do they have that we have to protect? What key service providers do they have? All of this builds a great model to create that stratagem going forward. So as you're working through your daily life in InfoSec, you're always working towards improving that defense in depth, be it something simple like an incident response policy. Maybe you've had one incident response policy for 3 years. You've done your annual reviews of it, but suddenly you realize, I really want to rewrite this thing from the ground up. But what I also want to do is I want to start undertaking wargaming. This is something that a lot of organizations don't do. I'm going to take my incident response policy and I'm going to wargame a ransomware attack against it. I'm going to bring in certain people from the company. I'm going to sit down with them and we're going to role play. If any of you are old D&D players or something like that, you'll know what I mean. we're going to role play a ransomware incident. I'll go online, I'll find out what tends to happen, build a story out of that, and then we'll run it through incident response. Really important to do, provides you with great sort of intelligence, which is that layer 6 for things like playbooks. Maybe you'll identify a new technology that will be really useful to implement to help protect your stack. You know, your defense in depth should be at the forefront of all your stratagems. And I think a lot of infosec people who've been working for the same organization sometimes kind of can forget that. You know, they've done a lot of work, they've worked over many, many years, but security is something that never stops. It's always changing. The vulnerabilities, the issues that occur quite often change over time. The things that I was concerned about 20 years ago in security when I was securing an environment are very, very different from what I would look at now. I never discount them, you know, you never know. Another computer virus may happen again that's really, really bad, like the I love you virus, but the likelihood is much, much lower now because our endpoint security is a lot more mature. Let's have a look at the chat. What have we got? So would visible security include security certifications on a website? Absolutely, yeah. As I said, you know, with regards to the sign on the gate, you know, if you've got your own house and you've got a lovely garden, you've got lovely stuff in your garden, something simple like putting a sign there saying beware of the dog, even if you don't have one, can deter a lot of people from even having a pop at stealing stuff from your garden. And it's the same in an organization. You know, if you're saying, yes, we've got ISO 27001, yes, we're PCI compliant, or you know, we're HIPAA compliant, that kind of thing. It sounds silly, but you know, it's all part of that defense in depth. It does actively work to protect you to a certain extent. So do it, you know. Plus, it's great marketing, and companies, especially in the service industry, like cloud computing companies or companies that are providing some kind of service. You know, they love to have that kind of thing on there, and it does help business along. This is where, believe it or not, security can provide additional benefits by helping you sell the products that you're trying to sell to people. So yeah, you know, have a section on your website about, you know, the security of your organization. You obviously don't go into details. You've got to keep some things back. You don't want people knowing exactly, you know, how you work, but you know, do it. Why not? Honeypots. Okay, can you explain honeypots? Many people don't really understand them very well. Okay, honeypots are a very, I would like to say they're a very old concept. So back when a lot of us infosec people were very highly technical, we wanted to try to figure out how people were actively attacking certain types of networks and environments. So what we would do is we would set up what we call a honeypot. And it's the same concept that apparently the Russians were very good with during, you know, periods of time where they were sending out spies. You know, they'd have the pretty guy or the pretty girl at the end of the bar. They'd point out the target to the pretty guy, pretty girl, who would then try to get them to come and have a drink with them, and probably various other things as well, to try and get the information out of them. Digitally speaking, we're doing the same thing. We're creating a bogus environment with nothing really in it beyond maybe a bit of data or some assets that are usually virtual in nature, that look like they're something cool for a cracker or a hacker or a malicious actor to go and get. But in actual fact, they're nothing. They're just there solely to try to record the type of attacks that are being done against that asset. So then that security professional can look at the logs afterwards and go, so that's how you did it, and then work on a way to prevent compromise on the attack patterns that we use. Some researchers still use that kind of model to be able to write articles on how attacks occur, that kind of thing. It is an older concept. It is pretty cool though, but you've got to have like additional resource to be able to do it. There's some cool videos on YouTube of a guy who he's using a similar kind of concept for the types of individuals who nick your package. So he's got like a bogus box in a popular retailer's marketing thing on the desk, and somebody will come along, nick it, jump in their car, go off, get it home. They pull the top off the box, and it sprays glitter everywhere, plays a funny piece of music, and actively records them. And I think one of the ones that I saw sprayed some really bad fart gas just to punish them. But you know, that's what we would also term as a honeypot. They're pretty cool. Have a look at them. There's a lot of data on what they are, and people still do use them. Am I suggesting that companies should have all these solutions processes on the iceberg diagram? Yeah, feasibly. You've got to map your countermeasures to be able to track and understand them. Or if you move on to another organization, the next infosec professional coming in would love to have some kind of document that just quickly and clearly shows what layers you have of protection within the organization. There's nothing worse than inheriting security from a security professional who hasn't done some kind of mapping as to the stratagem, because you've then got to try and figure out what they've got. Some of it, like endpoint security and firewalls and the more technical side of things, are relatively easy to find with simple scans and stuff. But it's much easier if it's actually listed. Hopefully it's listed on their asset register because they followed, you know, security protocol by having an asset register. But by having a good visual like that defense in depth diagram, you can see at a glance what you have. And you can even color code those countermeasures, green if you have them in place, orange if they're being worked on, you know, at that time, red if it's something you really want, but the powers that be haven't given you budget yet. It's even great if you're going into the C-suite, or you're going into the powers that be who are saying, why do you need your budget? And you can show them a nice color code. Well, our security is more red at the moment, which means we don't have it, than green, which means we do have it. So would it not be a lot nicer to be a little bit more secure? Obviously, you're probably going to have to communicate a bit better than that. But again, it's a good visual aid. I used to quite often, when I was running security for individual firms and not consulting, I would have a diagram like that on the wall. I would purloin one of the big A1 or the A2 printers, and I would print the damn thing and stick it up on the wall. Nowadays, people have like televisions and stuff in their offices. I'd love one, but my finance officer won't let me. So, you know, and they just kind of project it onto that so they can amend it and update it, and they don't have to cut down trees in order to do it that often. But it's great to have this visual. Okay, an older IT student at the start of changing my career, what sort of areas should I focus on to get into this area? Okay, there was a lot of this covered in my first masterclass that you can see on the channel, but I'll quickly go over it. Be as general as possible when you first start. Learn governance. What is a policy? What's the anatomy of a policy, a procedure? How do they work? What are they there to achieve? Look at obvious countermeasures like endpoint security. Look at, go to things like Bleeping Computer, the Register, the Razorthorn website, or the podcasts, or whatever, and listen and do as much listening and reading as you can on security in general. Become as general as possible to begin with. Once you've established a path that you want to go down, start to focus on key areas. Being a pen tester is a very different discipline than being a CISO, or being, SOC analyst. But some of the principles are very, very much the same. The basics are still the same. Listen to that first podcast, the first masterclass. I do go over it quite a bit. I'm new to cyber. I've been studying cyber for a year. would you work long hours if you're on a project? Oh, lordy lord. Yeah. Security is a very long process, and it never ends. It's a process that just circles round and comes back again. That's not to say it's monotonous. Information security can be one of the fastest paced, frightening disciplines you can do. As I said earlier on, you can go from being perfectly fine sitting in your office thinking, oh, this is getting kind of boring, 1 minute, to absolute bedlam and people banging on your door screaming the whole world is coming to an end. All in like 10 minutes. And then by the end of the day, it'll go quiet again. And sometimes people will thank you and sometimes people won't. You know, I like to keep a good work-life balance, I'll be honest, and I encourage all my consultants and all my staff to do the same thing. If you're working long hours on a security project because you want to get it done, that's one thing. If you're working long hours because you feel you have to, because your employer is forcing you to, I'll be honest, I'd probably reassess what I'm doing. It's like anything. I mean, if you're working 18 hours a day and you've got no other kind of life or no way to relax, you know, if you're a gamer or if you're a golfer or whatever it may well be, then you're just going to burn out. And burnout is a really, really big problem in infosec, I'd like to point out. I actually did a podcast on burnout. Go and listen to it. So, yeah, you know, work the hours you need to, obviously, as you're contracted to. But I you know, Rome wasn't built in a day, and neither was security. And because you're going to be doing this process over and over again, just, you know, be a bit careful about working too long hours. Is there any way you can practice doing scenarios? There's all kinds of places you can go and get information from, but the best thing to do is to think up a scenario, think up a real world one. What happens if, you know, this is a good example. When I see some organizations doing wargaming, information security people doing wargaming, they tend to focus in on IT issues. Information security is so much more than just IT. Okay. You know, security comes into what happens if you have a single point of failure in a business. Maybe you have one financial officer who has access to the banking information, who has access to the bank accounts of the organization. What happens if he dies? Do people not get paid? It's a single point of failure. As an information security professional, arguably part of your job is to look at single points of failure and say, got a bit of a problem here. If, you know, Phyllis in finance, you know, dies, who else has got access to the accounts or knows where the accounts are? Oh, no one. She's been doing it for years. We should probably start looking at getting a backup then. You know, what if you have one IT administrator, let's call him Dan, who has all the administrative accounts to all of the infrastructure, and there's no one else? Well, you can't have that, because what happens if he, you know, goes rogue, locks you out? Boom, all of a sudden, you've lost access to everything. And believe it or not, it has happened. So, yeah, when you're doing scenarios, dream one up. Say, okay, what happens if one of my IT guys goes rogue and cuts access to, you know, to all of our systems? What happens if, you know, somebody comes in, drops a load of hooky USB sticks in the foyer of our building? What happens if our C-suite are all on a director's jolly to the local Indian restaurant and they all get food poisoning and die? You know, There's all kinds of cool scenarios you can do. People used to laugh at me when I did Pandemic. They don't laugh anymore, I can tell you that. So yeah, think them up. Right, what else have we got? I thought you have to be dynamic and diverse. Yeah, you do. It's a bit of a tough one. You know, dynamic, diverse, adaptable, but you've also got to have some good, solid principles in place when you're doing security. You know, coming to the end, I've probably got enough for one more question. You said you need to have a thick skin in this job. Don't need to give fine details, but what's the worst thing that you've experienced? Oh, there's been so many. Probably the one that I can talk about was there was an organization a long time ago that I did an investigation on. They brought me in to find out what had been going on. They suspected their IT director had been selling their IP to a competitor. And I came in and I did a forensics review alongside a friend of mine at the time who was a forensics guy. We did some investigation. We looked through emails, spent quite a long time doing the investigation, and we found out indeed this IT director had basically taken all the plans for this particular type of database and sold it and given it away to the competitor. And I had to deliver that message to the board of directors, and the CEO, who was the MD of the company, he actually owned the company, burst into tears in front of me. You know, I watched the whole man's world shatter around him. It was horrible, but that's what I was there to do. I was there to investigate and you know, kind of report on what had been happening. The awful situation with that. There's nothing you can do. The horse has bolted. It's gone. The security hadn't been done in the first place to prevent that kind of thing from occurring. And sometimes when that horse has bolted, it's gone. It's done. That's it. There's nothing you can do about it. That firm didn't recover from that. They ended up selling out their business to the same competitor who bought their IP, which was a bitter pill, for a bargain basement price. It's horrible. The most heartwarming thing, oh God. There's been a lot. There's been situations where people have been accused of doing stuff that they haven't been doing. And security has gone in, done an instant response. We've done our investigations and found out that somebody was trying to frame them for misconduct of a certain unpleasant nature that's very easy to get you fired, if you see what I mean. I won't go into details. But we investigated, we found out what was going on there. You know, I've in my career, there was a thing called the I love you virus that had been going around, you know, and it was causing absolute havoc. And at the time, I was big on it. You know, we didn't call it endpoint security, we called it AV, and that was my main thing that I looked after alongside the firewalls. And I was so meticulous about putting in good quality AV that was up to date, and keeping an eye on what was going on in the big wide world, doing my intelligence, that by the time we'd heard that the I love you virus was going out there and infecting everything like crazy, we'd already put in countermeasures to prevent the emails and quarantine them at the email gateway as they started coming through, so we didn't actually get an outbreak at all. That got me some new firewalls bought after I'd done that. I worked for a Japanese firm and they were very thankful at the end of it. What would you like? I'd like a couple of new firewalls if I could. No problems at all. Pretty much signed a blank check and let me pick what I wanted. So you can be a rock star in security. It's not often, but you know, it can be quite rewarding, especially when you see somebody attacking and failing. you know, you're sitting there and you're getting reports for your logs, for your SIEM, for, you know, from, you know, wherever, and you're seeing people having a good old poke and a prod, and they're not getting anywhere close. You're just sitting there going, ha ha. Of course, it starts worrying when you do start seeing them get somewhere. That's when you start to panic a little bit. Have I traveled around a lot? Oh, yes. I've been all over the world. Um, all over Europe, all over the States. Haven't gone as far as Australia yet. I've worked in all kinds of different countries. I've experienced all kinds of different cultures. One of the masterclasses I want to do is on being a consultant and the things to watch out for. It sounds really good, and it is really good, but burnout hits hard when you're a consultant. All I'll say is being a consultant and doing a lot of traveling and seeing a lot of different environments really skills you up very, very quickly in this space, because you're going to see a lot of different ways of doing security in a lot of different organizations. So you very quickly get to learn different things that people have been doing and different types of things that people are concerned about. Problem is you're going to spend a lot of your time in airports. You're going to spend a lot of your time in hotel rooms. And it's not too much of a problem when you're in your 20s and you don't have kids and you're not missing the kids and you're not feeling the age a little bit. But when you're sort of 40, 50 odd, and you just kind of want to get back and see the children, whilst you still get to see the cool stuff and you get to do the traveling, you're not going to be doing sightseeing that often. You're going to be there to work. And by the time you finish the work, all you want to do is get on that flight and get home, you know, go down your local pub, have a pint, see the kids, see the missus or the husband or whatever. You know, it can be cool. But there we go. So I think that's it for this masterclass. Oh, what's the I'll go on then, Ryan. I'll do one last one. What's the longest I was away? 2 years. Good fun. I was a lot younger than I am now. I didn't have the kids and didn't have the missus, not the current missus anyway. And I came back for weekends. It was really good. It was really nice. I got to make a lot of new friends. But yeah, you know, after half that time was done, I was like, I now kind of want to stop doing it. But yeah, right. Thank you all. I hope you all had a great time. Please feel free to check out the podcast that we run. There's a lot of good information on there from a lot of different people who might be able to help you out with a bit of perspective of what they're doing and where they're from. Obviously, on the channel, we have the spotlights on technology. That's a really good way of learning about a sector of technology and some of the vendors in that space and some of what their thoughts are. As I said before, if you want to get that copy of that Defense in Depth iceberg, I have a copy that's editable. So you can have that, you can utilize that in your career, you can amend it, you can change it. I do have a little bit of spelling mistakes in there that I don't know how they cropped in there, which is really embarrassing, but I will change those. Or you can change them yourself. Yeah, you know, you probably spell better than I can. So yeah, you know, please keep in contact. If you've got any questions, please feel free to let me know. Get in touch with us if you want us to cover anything specific. Give me a shout. I'll add it into the list of what we're going to do. I don't know quite what we're going to do next masterclass. There's a couple of options I have open. Where can you find the podcast? So look for Razorwire on Spotify. If you go onto LinkedIn and look at our company details and follow us on the company, you'll see things flash up when we have new podcasts that are available and where you can go and get them. We have our YouTube channel, Razorthorn Security, you know, easily searchable. Or again, here you go. There's links for the Spotify and other platforms that Abby has put into the chat. Thank you all. Look after yourselves. Have a great weekend. And we'll be seeing you all again soon. Thank you very much. Bye.